At the forefront of cutting-edge technology and leading the local ICT infrastructure services market is a technology company with a passion for connecting people. Centec is South Africa's premier provider of electronic communication network services with a vision to become a global enabler of broadcasting and digital content delivery.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you've just joined us, welcome to Sustainability Summit 2020. Please don't forget to hashtag Summit 2020 on social media. And once again, as I said, if you've just joined us, you did miss a beautiful welcome address that truly set the standard for today's conversation. But nonetheless, joining us this morning, we have Mr. Brandon Abdina, who's an attorney, consultant, and co-founder of Climate Risk Clinic. He will be leading a panel discussion about what does smart infrastructure mean in the context of African cities. And once again, we remember words from Hao Jun Chong, who says, people overproduce pollution because they are not paying for the cost of dealing with it. And I guess, you know, the whole sentiments around pollution and infrastructure are concomitant and go hand in hand. Without further ado, may I please welcome Mr. Brandon Abdina. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I hope we can look forward to a stimulating panel discussion. So we're going to look at what smart infrastructure means in the context of African cities. Very pertinent question at this time. We're obviously coming through a period of severe disruption with the global pandemic. That on top of challenging economic conditions for the country. So it'll be good to have the discussions focused on how this level of sustainability can actually take us through to new places. And I'd like to remind us all to consider sustainability in the broad sense of the word. So often the issue of environmental sustainability comes up when we talk about it, but we also need to bear in mind socio-economic stability. How do we keep a country that can get quite restless happy, looking after all the people, and financial stability as well, financial sustainability. So with that, I'd like to welcome the panelists and ask you to please all introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are, who you're working for, what work you're doing, and just very briefly how the work you're doing ties in with the topic at hand today. So if we could start with Lawrence, please.
Good morning, colleagues. It's a pleasure to join esteemed panelists on this discussion. My name is Lawrence Juku. I've been in the energy sector for over 2 decades in various positions right across the public as well as the private sector. Having started my career in the mining sector, went through Eskom, like most of us in the energy sector, somehow you touch and pass through Eskom, and eventually ending up where I am right now, where I'm currently executive head of IoT Africa at Vodacom, with a special focus in terms of the business and the vertical that I'm leading, which is IoT business for smart cities, smart buildings, smart mining, right across to the security cluster sector in terms of developing and driving solutions together with some of the subsidiaries that we have as Vodacom. And on today's discussion on sustainability right across, as Ben pointed out, which is not just focusing on environmental, but on socio-economic. As Vodacom currently heading solutions in the smart building, smart security, but of significant to note is projects that we currently are doing within the smart water solutions with one of the major metros in the Eastern Cape, where besides looking at revenue, we're looking at how do we manage in a sustainable way this very scarce resource, which is water, especially in the context of the Eastern Cape and also South Africa, where drought has played havoc within our lives. And together with that, having that socio-economic impact. As you would know, when people don't see transparency, don't trust the system, don't trust processes, what do? Vandalism increases. Non-payment of services increases. So those are some of the solutions that we're driving. And my last comment, so I can give my colleagues a chance, is I believe that sustainable smart infrastructure is at the core of African cities, now as well as we progress towards the future. Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Lawrence. We'll certainly be testing that, that view that it's at the core. It'll be a good thing to explore. Chris, could you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Brandon, and good morning, colleagues. Good morning, anyone else that may be online. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Chris Campbell. I am the CEO of an organization called Consulting Engineers South Africa. I myself am a registered professional civil engineer. And essentially what we do, so we've got about 590 member companies across the country. And essentially our companies, our member companies provide the infrastructure solutions, the design, and so forth related to infrastructure. We are in fact probably the leading organization for consulting engineering in the country. We've been around for 68 years, and we continue to contribute to the developments in our own country. Our activities are not confined to South Africa only. We also interface with African Regional Body for Consulting Engineers. So we have good knowledge of activities on our own continent. Maybe the last point is we also affiliated to an international body based in Geneva, which consists of 106 member countries. We both local, which is lacquer, but we are global citizens as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Local is lacquer. It's good to be networked as well. So going down my list, Dumisa, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Brandon. Thanks, fellow panelists and everyone who's watching the panel. Syntec is an infrastructure company, so to say. We are involved primarily on communications, infrastructure, broadcasting, distribution, and broadband or connectivity. We have reach throughout the country. We have got a property estate as a communications company. We have sites and towers that we use for our business. I am the head of research and innovation, and our involvement as a Department of Research and Innovation, we are trying to forecast and look at the future of technology, in particular in communications, but as far as it impacts on other verticals. So we are looking at throughout the infrastructure environment. We are looking at how we can use communications in transport, in mining, in manufacturing, in education, in managing environment. So we sort of look at various verticals. Because of that, we are, I think the COO spoke about it earlier on, we are investing in the past 2-3 years. We have been investing on 5G, which is modern telecommunications infrastructure. We are investing on cloud computing to ensure that we have got enough distributed computing power and storage for all these verticals we are talking about. For big data, we are investing on artificial intelligence, which it becomes core of smart infrastructure towards the future. So we can say that research and innovation at Syntec is about smart infrastructure. And I think as an organization, we are looking at various aspects of the country, but in particular, we are focusing on government initiatives to bring about fourth industrial revolution and to advance infrastructure management. Thank you.
Thank you, Dumisa. Forecasting and futures, that's indeed what we're here for today. Hiten, can you introduce yourself, please?
Morning, Brandon, and morning, fellow panelists and all attendees as well. Pleasure to join you today on this exciting topic. I'm Hiten Palmer, Director of the Uyilo Electric Mobility Program, which has been active for the last 7 years on enabling electric mobility in South Africa. In terms of the topic of discussion today and per the opening session this morning, infrastructure development is critical in Africa alongside that. And specifically as transport as an economic activity within all regions, it is critical that we have sustainable infrastructure to support transport as well as transportation technologies, and also for the manufacturing opportunities that transport technologies present and the industry as a whole on that. In South Africa, the automotive industry contributes to 7% to national GDP, and it's important that transport plays its role in the technology revolution, as well as sustainable city development and urban development. Through that, we're seeing global cities and urban environments facing challenges of poor air quality that is impacting human health and impacting the healthcare sector alongside that in a crisis that we currently face with COVID. And this is where cities worldwide are transitioning to electric mobility to combat human-induced climate change and impact on air qualities. And through that, we need to see sustainable infrastructure that gets developed in Africa alongside that, and not Africa be subjected to challenges that we're seeing developed countries and developed cities worldwide. So there are opportunities for African cities to leapfrog and embrace sustainable infrastructure and sustainable transport. So we look forward to the further discussions with the fellow panelists and contributions on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hiten. It was nice to hear you talk about manufacturing opportunities and employment, as obviously this is one of the greatest threats to sustainability that we're facing at the moment. Najwa, can you introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yes, good morning, fellow panelists, Brandon. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Najwa Ali Idris. I'm the head of the Jobs Fund, and the fund is located at the National Treasury of South Africa. The Jobs Fund is a matching grant fund, and it operates on challenge fund principles. It was launched in 2011 with a total operating budget of 9 billion. And our mandate is to test innovative approaches to employment creation, build partnerships with the private sector, civil society, and other government departments and agencies. The fund intervenes in the labor market from both the labor supply and labor demand perspective. We make funding available through 4 funding windows: enterprise development, which focuses on initiatives that develop innovative commercial approaches to sustainable job creation in a way that combines profitability with high social impact. Our second funding window is around support for work seekers, which seeks to link active work seekers, especially youth, to formal sector opportunities and job placement. Our third funding window is around institutional capacity building, and that targets projects that improves operational efficiencies and remove barriers to doing business. And our fourth funding window is an infrastructure investment funding window, and this involves co-financing of critical missing infrastructure to improve the business environment for enterprises and employment-linked investment. The Jobs Fund's approach to infrastructure investment, our focus is really very much on inclusive economic development. We look for the secondary activities that will ensure future sustainability of the infrastructure, activities such as opportunities for enterprise development and improving skills matching the labor market, value chain and supply chain development. Focus on more than jobs created during the construction phase of infrastructure development. We look for those opportunities that will stimulate demand in the economy. We put job creation at the center of our investment decision. We leverage our grant funds to crowd in other funding sources for job creation. And in a nutshell, I would say that we focus on enabling infrastructure that directly results in inclusive economic growth. Thank you, Brandon.
Najwa. Yes, it's very good to hear that. We know that obviously infrastructure construction can create a lot of employment, but what happens after that? So we are looking for durable, resilient jobs. Shamima?
Thanks, Brandon. Hi to the fellow panelists as well as everyone attending. My name is Shamima Timol, and I'm a senior consultant with Hatch in our Urban Solutions business. And really, Hatch is a global company that operates across three primary sectors. That's infrastructure, energy, and metals. And our Urban Solutions business is a unit that focuses on helping organizations to solve some of the toughest challenges that are facing urban development within the city context. And it's really within this context of change through urbanization, climate change, financial and political volatilities, finite resources that we operate in that space. And really, most of my career has comprised working with an amazing cross-functional team of professionals ranging from economists, engineers, planners, people within the digital and advisory space to come up with these integrated solutions. And I've had the privilege also of working across the full value chain of the project lifecycle. So right away from coming up with the vision to developing a strategy and a plan to realize that vision, to working on specific projects on the implementation front, and helping our clients work with the operational readiness and maintenance and management of assets. And so I've worked with both public and private sector clients, across a range of industries, including city development, urban development, and transport, and a number of advisory assignments for various public transport agencies. So my most recent Smart Cities project involved a collaboration of various entities and organizations to manage a multidisciplinary team in the development of a 50-year airport city master plan. And really, this master plan was about guiding both public and private sector investment in the area around the King Shaka International Airport. And it's really an exciting space to be in. I mean, I'm passionate about what I do, and I love the fact that we get to solve these challenges every day. So really, I look forward to our discussion, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Shamima. Certainly a lot of experience there, and I think we're all going to benefit from hearing about that. And then Noel. Noel, are you online? Perhaps muted? Okay, perhaps there's a technical problem there, so we'll come back to Noel when I can see him online. Okay, so we are here. We want to hear about solutions. We want to hear about the thinking around solutions. We want to hear about your experience and your expertise. But we also, apart from what's already on the table and about to be on the table, we want to explore some of the concepts that underlie the topic. So do feel free to venture your opinions, to ask questions on what's come up. I'm going to direct questions at who I think is most appropriate, or the people most appropriate to answer them, but please raise your hands. If someone's giving input and you feel you have something to add, I'll keep an eye out for raised hands, and we'll try and bring you into that conversation as well. So if you have a look at what smart cities are, if you Google that, there are a wide range of definitions, from a relatively narrow definition that speaks about digital connectivity and communication and feedback, all the way through to the full Buck Rogers package with flying cars and many promises of how these smart cities and smart infrastructure are going to improve lives and make cities more pleasant to live in. But let's explore a little bit what we mean by smart city. So Shamima, could I come back to you for that one initially?
Sure. Thanks, Brandon. You know, when we talk about smart cities within this African and South African context, I think it's really important to realize that we as the African continent, we may have different challenges, but at our core, you know, what we're trying to solve is really fundamentally a human challenge, which, you know, applies to the whole world, really. And you know, smart may mean different things to different people, I think, as you've alluded to, Brandon. But there are some key principles, and you know, some of these key principles are the fact that smart should be, or smart infrastructure should really be timeless. You know, we can't talk about something that is smart for 2020 because that means then we don't have it right. It really needs to transcend your generations, your political boundaries, your geographies. The second point that I think is important from a principles perspective is to recognize, again, as you mentioned, that it's not just about technology and ICT. It's really much more than that. And often smart is confused with convenience, you know, and we ignore what's the bigger role that smart infrastructure has to play from a total value creation. So it's important to actually come back to the fundamentals and realize that if we lived in a world where resources were infinite, we'd really be chasing down the idea of convenience. But the reality is we have finite resources. And you know, an example that I can think of is just around autonomous vehicles. So yes, it satisfies the requirement of convenience, but does it actually solve the fundamental problem of moving people in a sustainable manner? And then the fourth principle that I think is important is that we can't just see infrastructure in isolation. We can't just talk about smart infrastructure. Because it really is a means to something else. It's an enabler of activity, of opportunity, of growth and prosperity. And so it is within this context that really I would say smart means three things. The first thing is that smart infrastructure needs to respond to a specific city need. It can't just be smart for the sake of being smart. Number two is that it really needs to do more with less. And that means, you know, not just looking at the supply side of infrastructure provision, but also looking at how we manage demand better. It's also about not just creating new infrastructure, but looking at what we have. How can we do better with it? How can we renew it, regenerate it, optimize it to be better? And it's also about shared capacity. How can we use one thing, you know, to satisfy multiple needs? The third and final thing that I would say is critical to the definition of smart is around ecosystem thinking, right? So recognizing that everything is connected, that when you produce waste, it can be connected to energy. When you have sensor networks that are connecting data, they can connect to how your urban development and society can function better. It can change people's behaviors and consumer the way they consume resources, which really, you know, manages the demand and reduces supply. And so when we think of infrastructure, it's not just energy infrastructure and how it connects to mobility infrastructure, but it's about how do those integrated infrastructure elements integrate with, you know, with society, with your urban development, with operations, and with governments and the way in which they manage these infrastructure. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Shamima. It's good to hear that humanity is definitely still put at the absolute forefront of the activity. I will pick up on that, but I see Noel's back online. So Noel, if you could just introduce yourself quickly, who you are and how the work you do fits into the topic.
Thanks, Brandon, and my apologies for connection issues. Name is Noor Masha Mombe. I work for Kansai Plascon, and Kansai Plascon manufactures and distributes paint products and related coatings. What I actually do is I'm responsible for innovation, research and development, new product development, and product improvement. Why would this have to do with smart infrastructure? Probably some of you might want to ask. So as you can see, each and every room where we are at the moment, there is some paint of some sort at the wall. And what we have been doing as industry and as Plascon particularly is to try and develop green coatings that would make living areas more environmentally friendly. That would make them also do more work, not just to have a color and a protection, but to do some of the things that would need extra effort if you were to achieve that. So we look at sustainability issues, we look at pollution issues, we look at health issue in all living spaces. So this is how we fit into this topic. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, Noel. So Shamima spoke about the unique challenges of African cities, which perhaps are different from what's happening elsewhere in the world, where maybe smart infrastructure has been rolled out. So what are the unique challenges from the African point of view? What does this continent city have to deal with in order to meet the needs of people? Lawrence, could you come in there?
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. I think one of the unique things, what Shamina also touched on is how smart infrastructure has to transform the communities or drive the change within the communities. But at the same time, the African cities have to contend with infrastructure. So if you take a case of Hitton, for instance, in terms of e-mobility, for us to roll out those kind of solutions, we're not going to be building completely new infrastructure. In most cases, we need to work within an existing infrastructure. And the challenge that we face as African cities on smart infrastructure is that how do I then, to the point that Shamina also mentioned, that says existing infrastructure, how do I take that infrastructure, refurbish it where required, upgrade it where required, to meet the needs of where we want to go with smart infrastructure. But that is not done in isolation, because you always have to look at an ecosystem. So when you look into that ecosystem, it's not done in isolation in terms of it's going to be just focusing on delivering sustainable water or electricity or transport solutions, but it's an overall impact. And if you take, for instance, some of the legacy issues that we have, which is the maintenance backlog, refurbishment backlog that we have in African cities, I mean, a real example that, people in Cape Town, people in Joburg and Gauteng areas would also resonate with is the rail infrastructure, which has been vandalized over a period of time, which requires us now as a country and as an industry to do refurbishment. But when we do that refurbishment, we're doing it now with smart technologies being now incorporated in the first point. Secondly, we're looking into how do we protect that infrastructure going forward. So that means you start looking into solutions whereby drones become part of your security offering, so that you are able to manage, detect, and react to incidents of vandalism. That is part of that. But if you look into the actual communities that are affected, I mean, if you think, I'll make an example. If you look into Johannesburg South, like a place like Orange Farm, where rail infrastructure has been vandalized, the trains are not running. Those people are on taxis on a daily basis, they're on buses. So their socio-economic impact is now, it's serious. In the first place, some people have to wake up as early as 3 a.m. to get to work. The transport infrastructure is being strained. Why? Because there's more taxis, there's more buses on the road. That's besides the fact that you have challenges with the taxi industry from time to time. So, and you look into these households, if you look into the economic sector right now, these are the households that could spend as much as 40% of their income on transportation. So you can actually see where African cities, much as we have to journey to the new smart infrastructure going forward, but at the same time, we need to keep in check, parallel to that, to upgrade, refurbish existing infrastructure that will also assist us in implementing some of the changes that we want to put into our cities, but contending also with a shortage of resources and funds within those kind of cities.
Thank you, Lawrence. Yes, it's obviously a very real issue for many people, for all of us, is transport. Maybe Hitson, you can come in there. And what is the state of e-mobility in South Africa? And is it something that is going to go beyond the well-heeled in the BMW i3s? Is this something that's going to be used for public transport?
Indeed, thanks, Brendan. And just, picking up from the two communications feedback from the two fellow panelists, the main challenges we face is mass urbanization, traffic, and then pollution alongside that. And then in South Africa's readiness, I think, we need to look at an enabling environment. And it starts with government's framework alongside that. So, if we look at our National Development Plan of 2030, there's specific context to sustainable infrastructure and sustainable transport that speaks to that. And then we look at the relative frameworks of the Green Transport Strategy from National Department of Transport. You've got the Industry Policy Action Plan from the Department of Trade and Industry, and other multinational, multi-department approaches to creating enabling environment. I think, policies is one thing. We need to look at policy implementation, and that is alongside government and the private sector as well, from commitment and also investment into that. So it's a hands-on, hand-in-hand approach from government as well as industry that needs to also play their part. The framework of local government, cities have an enabling environment from the frameworks on the ground, from bylaws and enabling environment within the cities. We're starting to see fleets, City of Tshwane, City of Cape Town have embraced fleets of electric vehicles. So it's still early days. We're less than 0.001% of electric vehicles in the country. We need to start seeing a shift of that taking place. The challenge we face alongside that, and this is what is impacting the growth of electric vehicles, is import duties that are imposed on electric vehicles. And that is within the tax regime in South Africa, because your automotive industry, contributing to 7% of national GDP, doesn't locally manufacture electric vehicles, and it relies on importing electric vehicles. And that's where there's a customs duty tariff that is imposed higher. However, the various role players within the sector are unpacking that. And it's not only within the passenger car market. The cities are also starting to look at their infrastructure plans in terms of bus rapid transport systems and other sustainable infrastructure that we need to move the masses. Public transport is the biggest framework, and Lawrence also touched on that in terms of sustainable infrastructure and the masses. How are we going to improve that? Majority of the low-income communities spend, up to 60 to 70% on the income on transport. And how are we going to embrace this going forward? And that's where we need to look at it. So, from a technology solution perspective, it is there. There's massive uptake and solutions that are available. We need to look at this on a partnership perspective, PPP, with private and public sector on moving this forward. And we need to run pilots in the country and, work together with cities and public sector and private sector in embracing these. So I think there is a significant opportunity going forward that we need to embrace sustainable transport and sustainable infrastructure, as Shamima also alluded to. It is not only transport, it is smart buildings, smart infrastructure, and not forgetting smart governance. Within that, we need all of that to work hand in hand in developing the ecosystem in South Africa. and then, unlock the opportunities. Let's not forget at the revolution that took place in the leapfrog on telecommunications in Africa. Fixed line telecommunications were just a stagnant growth. Once we introduced, mobile communications, that leapfrog, and also mobile payments, M-Pesa, that was developed in Kenya. Look at the growth of that. Europe is only starting to embrace mobile payments now in the last recent years, but it's been very active in Africa. So I think, there is opportunities for Africa and African cities, embracing the smart revolution. I think it starts with smart governance, and then all of the other pillars that come into play, smart energy, smart infrastructure, smart communications, smart transportation. And then we can embrace, smart city living for all communities in our communities, all citizens in our communities.
Thank you, Hitton. So we need smart governance to make all the other smart components work. Chris, from your point of view, when we talk about smart governance, in terms of the kind of experiences your members have with government, are we seeing an embrace and an understanding at those levels of smart initiatives? Have we lost Chris? I know, Chris, you are there. You're on mute.
My apologies. Thanks, Brandon. So when we talk about the notion of smart infrastructure, then what we are alluding to at the moment is what is commonly also known as the soft aspect of the smart infrastructure component, and not the hard. Hard being where the rubber hits the road and the telecoms wires. The soft infrastructure is indeed evidently is the need for governance, leadership, and innovation. And of course, in this kind of leadership model, one needs to see a strong political mandate and a will to enhance the service delivery. And there must also be an unambiguous vision of the role of technology, which must be fulfilled across the various governmental departments. Now, that is very, very crucial. We know we're near the smart city, and unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has accelerated the need for some of these systems to be implemented. Because what happens at the moment is it would appear that government is lagging totally in its basic connectivity. Whereas during the lockdown period, many of our companies were able to adapt and they could interact with each other, continue a lot of the work, online design work, planning, and so forth, much as we're doing now, and continue to do so. And many of them have actually adapted their business models so that they're not only office-based, but they take advantage of this ICT, to optimize their processes. But on the contrary, what we're seeing from a client body, public sector client body, government, I think people lack the basic equipment even, and connectivity. So for the entire lockdown period, the bulk of people who needed to be present to process payments, to make sure companies can have sustainable cash flow for the work they've done and so on, that has just not been possible. So that has contributed to the demise. So, going into the future, one would hope that this is indeed a lesson learned for government, that a laptop, for example, should no longer be seen as what should we call it, a status symbol, a tool for mobility. And the next phase is for us to get serious about rolling out spectrum, making it cheaper, and increasing the opportunity for connectivity for public servants under these kind of situations. But, even to have this hybrid working environment that the industry now has. So you have continuity, not an absence of input from the client body. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, Chris. Dumisa, you mentioned in your opening address that Centec works a lot with the state as well. What has your experience been of these public-private interactions between yourself and government around smart infrastructure?
Yes, Brendan, maybe before I just answer that question directly, let me go back to the question around what is unique about Africa. Maybe to start off by saying, why are we talking smart infrastructure in the first place? As Shamina explained, it's about sustainability. So it's not about technology. There is a temptation for us as technology people to be excited by the technology, which is a good thing, but this is about sustainability. Now, what is unique in Africa, as opposed probably to the majority of Europe and maybe Americas, is that when we talk smart places or smart cities or smart, you cannot talk about cities without speaking about suburban and rural in Africa. And that's the biggest problem. So if we are developing a smart infrastructure, which is integrated development, monitoring and management of infrastructure, whether it's transport, whether it's environment, you have to integrate all those elements. So in Africa, it basically means that the integration between the cities, suburban and rural is so important. I think one of the speakers just said now that in Africa, the people who work in the cities come from 100 kilometers out of the city. So then it becomes important to really integrate, to have a tight integration of rural and cities. I interact on daily basis with people who come 100 kilometers from Pretoria, but we don't have trains. They rely on taxis. So you can talk about other things that relates to that as far as sustainability is concerned. Our experience as Centec in terms of working with government projects, with private sector, I think in terms of legislation, in terms of policy, we have enough instruments to do that. In terms of PFMA, we can formulate cooperation with private sector, with various components of government. We can form PPPs, but in practice, I would say that there is a lot of unreadiness, maybe that's the right word to use. A lot of unreadiness would then bring confusion sometimes, and probably slackness, so to say. I think where we need to do what we need to do around governance issues and policy issues is to see how we can execute some of these policies and legislation that already exist, so that we can actually work around those. And what I mean by that is that currently it's difficult to get a government department to work with another government department or government institution to work with another government institution without going out to the public, not necessarily because probably you are trying to make sure that we are being fair to entities outside government, but because probably it's easier to work government to government entities. It's also a little bit difficult to select specific partnerships around outside government that will bring investment, will bring value to the party without sometimes going through a bidding process, so to say. And again, here we're not talking about taking a shortcut. We're talking about entities that can bring investment. So I think those are things that from our experience that needs to be looked at. And we believe that legislation and policy is there, but it's just the practice and readiness to use such instruments.
Thank you, Dumisa. So yeah, the framework is there, but we need to perhaps work on smart collaboration, particularly in intergovernmental collaboration. So, and thank you also for adding the additional context to the uniquely African challenges. These are the things that we really need to get to grips with. So something that is truly unsustainable is our unemployment rate. Najwa, I'm going to ask you to come in. We've obviously seen the state putting a lot of emphasis on infrastructure development as an economic driver. Is it enough? Najwa, you're on mute. Here we go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Brandon. Yes, I mean, I think that we have seen that in the past, there's been an emphasis on infrastructure development, but the question really has been about how inclusive has that approach been? Has it really resulted in increased demand in our economy? So from a jobs fund perspective, we don't believe that infrastructure development alone is sufficient to ensure positive economic and job creation gains. Infrastructure alone does not create jobs. You have to be very clear on your intent at the beginning of a project, in the design of that project, to understand whether jobs is a key focus and of course what the implications are if jobs are a key focus. So for us in the jobs, when we say infrastructure alone does not create jobs, the majority of job creation impacts that we have observed were driven by secondary enterprise development for support for work seekers activities that were a part of the overall intervention design. The infrastructure component, of course, provides the foundation for the job creation activities to take place. But projects that provide secondary activities, we have found, have been much more successful at creating long-term sustainable jobs. We believe that in the conceptualization of these projects, we need to also adopt a social approach. And that is really about shared access and benefit. It is important to adopt an investment approach that promotes shared access and benefit to communities, to people who are trying to enter a particular supply chain or value chain. So really to think through what are the forward linkages as well as the backward linkages that we have to make to ensure a more inclusive approach to infrastructure development. We also say that from a jobs fund perspective, we haven't really focused on bulk infrastructure. We focus on enabling infrastructure. And this really means that we want to fund in infrastructure that ultimately catalyzes further investment and economic activity in other sectors. So again, making those forward and backward linkages. So from what we say is at the beginning of a project, there needs to be clear thinking about what are your priorities, what are your, is it just about the investment and the return on investment, or are you also seeking social impact? And in the jobs fund, the social impact really is about job creation, and that job creation comes about through the development of enterprises in the value chain of this infrastructure development, or it can be in respect of skills development and improving that match of what the market is looking for and supplying the relevant skills that is required in the market. And we believe that if you look and adopt that kind of approach, then your infrastructure is also much more sustainable because you have those secondary activities related to the infrastructure that then supports the ongoing life of that infrastructure. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, Najwa. So yeah, infrastructure is not the silver bullet. It needs to be very much focused and directed to achieve some of the social objectives that we need to achieve. One of the fears that goes around is with smartness, with fourth industrial revolution, et cetera, that there's a lot of automation. And we sit in a country where there's in fact an imperative to even facilitate labor intensive activities. So Shamima, from your sort of hands-on project experience, is this direction moving towards a place where we will possibly see less jobs as a result of smart technology?
Thanks, Brandon. So I think technology will continue to replace some of the roles, but really there's the very human skills of empathy, collaboration, and communication that will still be needed and cannot be replaced by technology. And so, through our experience, what we've realized is that the skills that you need aren't always available in the market. So some skills will no longer be needed. In some cases, people will need to upskill, and in some cases, the skills don't exist. I mean, if you look a decade ahead, some of the jobs that are going to be coming at that time haven't even been invented yet. But I think what's important when we're looking at how people upskill and participate, as it evolves, is really about thinking through the whole value chain. And something that Najwa mentioned that I think is also very important is just thinking through the solid business case. So being more rigorous in that upfront phase, where you're thinking through not just, as she said, the financial aspects, but what are the social aspects? What are the economic aspects, the job creation aspects? And then looking through to your planning and design, construction, operations, and maintenance. And also recognizing that even at that business casing stage, sometimes we don't take the time to understand really what those disruptive technologies can be. And it's important to identify that, to be able to guide the way people can participate moving forward. And also in construction, I think, I'm not sure if it was Lawrence who mentioned this, but thinking through the socio-economic aspects during construction that can generate that benefit both in construction and beyond. So it's really about changing our paradigm in which we think about job creation. Even if I think through how we as a company have evolved over time, where people started off with drawing on, manual CAD drawing boards, and then they had to evolve into using CAD, and then now we're evolving into your 3D models and things like that. I think we have to recognize that whether we like it or not, skills are really relevant for a very short space of time. Sometimes quote it being only about 5 years. So the messaging to people who are entering the job market and who are wanting to participate is really to focus on that upskilling continuously and to make sure that you remain relevant. And then if we look at also on the operations side, recognizing that big data is here and it's here to stay. And so really we need to focus on how people can participate in that data analytics, forming those insights to make better decisions. Also from an operations and maintenance perspective, when we look at automation, as an example within our mining industries, what we found is, yes, there may be automation, but you can have people alongside that automation. And with the move to new industries over time, it still opens up new opportunities for new participation. So, while you may have something automated, you still need on the background side a whole host of people to participate. It is a tough one. I think there's no clear answer, but we definitely, we cannot resist it. We need to embrace it and really look at how we participate meaningfully moving forward. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you, Shamima. So we need to be careful that smart is not always smart if we're not looking at the whole ecosystem. Lawrence, you wanted to add something to this.
Thank you, Brandon. I think the other important factor that the industry, both our side from consulting stage to government and to other stakeholders, including suppliers like Plascon and all those, is that when we look at smart infrastructure, we have this 30% local content or resources in an infrastructure project, but we don't scope it or drive what Najwa was touching on, which is basically the secondary enterprise sector. So when we are deliberate on that, we will see the socio-economic impact of smart infrastructure projects in the communities that we are implementing these projects. And the whole concept of shared access and benefits then becomes reality to the people on the ground, as opposed to I've just fulfilled my 30% local content, I've got local resources. And if you think of it, smart infrastructure projects anywhere in the world, the continent, are not thought of today and implemented tomorrow. They are planned over a number of years. So there's enough time if we think outside the box overall as an industry. I mean, you look into how the telco industry, for instance, looked at that. It was totally new technology, but what did it happen? It created an ecosystem that will support this industry going forward. I mean, from people supplying batteries, from people supplying equipment, and to this stage now, because of load shedding, there's people that are now managing generators online and all those kind of things. So you need to be deliberate in terms of how you create this secondary economy activity that are supporting these infrastructure projects within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Lawrence. So there is really potential for a form of trickle down from the main core of the projects to then small enterprises, etc., who support that. Interesting. So the word ecosystem comes up quite often, and that obviously includes acknowledging every component. So Noel, I wonder if you could tell us a bit about how the coatings industry actually contributes to smart infrastructure.
Thanks, Brandon. So from a coatings industry point of view, I think there are mega trends that have shaped the direction of our innovations in research and development. And some of these are really to try and address issues related to urbanization, which is happening essentially the worldwide. And Africa, I think by 2030, we're looking at probably 50% of the population will be living in cities. So whatever we have to contribute to make sure that those their needs are also addressed through our products that we offer into the market. We try as much as possible to incorporate some of those needs. So I mean, this is a very long conversation that I can have, but just to select a few examples is if you look at the challenges to do with energy, with air pollution, and with health, there are initiatives that, as an industry, we have already been involved in for some years now. I will just start by giving an example of energy, for instance. So we have developed coatings that can actually reduce the temperature of your living spaces or of your offices or your warehouses. What that does is if you are using energy to provide cooling systems, you can actually reduce the energy consumption of up to 10% in certain instances according to the work that we've done on the field, in the field. So in a way, with all the challenges that we have in terms of the energy and load shedding, I think my colleagues are talking about also load shedding and all these things. In a way, as an industry, we are also trying to contribute to management of energy consumption. So that's point number one. Point number two is around issues of health. So, you know, in cities, the air is very polluted. And sometimes we assume that when we see smoke and visible pollution, that's the only pollution. But there's actually pollution that is invisible. And if we are going to say in our smart city philosophy, we need to have people who live in health spaces. So from an coatings industry, again, what are we contributing in terms of trying to limit the pollution in the health space? So there are products that are being developed, some have been developed that can actually react with harmful gases that are actually, some of them can cause diseases like cancer and stuff. And what is also interesting is that some of these gases, invisible as they are, they actually come from things that we need in our daily life. Things like furniture, things like carpets, things like building materials. So they are there, you don't choose, they are there. So what we have tried to do is to provide solutions through coatings where you have these gases actually reacting with the coating on the wall and convert them to harmless gases. So in that way, we're trying to contribute also to sustainability and making sure that people living in cities, not only smart cities, but anywhere they live, they can be assured that at least there's something that is fighting their battles while they're asleep or something, especially in kids' rooms. The third and last option option that we also have looked at is actually the general pollution in terms of the ozone, in terms of smog, in terms of the volatile organic compounds. So why are these dangerous? Again, the most chemical industries emit these gases, and like I said, they are not visible, but we breathe them in, and they've got adverse effect on our health. So what we've been doing is to develop products that cannot emit dangerous gases into the atmosphere. Traditional products in our industry have been so dangerous because people were just focusing on whether it works or not, but the vigilance that what is the harmful effect to the environment and to the people was not looked at 20 years ago, but in the last 10, 15 years, there's been quite a lot of work that has been done in that area. So in short, this is the contribution, but not only coatings industry, but I think every industry, for us to achieve this smart city goal and improve the lives of people in cities and indeed in rural areas, like another one of the panelists said, we need to bring solutions in every material that we provide in the infrastructure in a way that actually makes living spaces more comfortable for our people. Thank you very much, Brendan.
Thank you, Noel. It's amazing what goes on when you drill down into specific industries and activities, and every little piece counts. In that regard, Hiten, can I throw you a bit of a curveball? So e-mobility, how sustainable is it if we are charging the electric vehicles from a carbon-intensive grid? And what's the overall footprint if you take into account batteries as opposed to conventional transport methods?
Great, thanks for that, Brendan, and always a topical point that always comes up. So, you know, within the context of South Africa, there was a macroeconomic study that was done last year on that. And in the transition to electric vehicles, one of the challenges the biggest contributor in South Africa's air quality within transport is that road transport contributes to 91.2% of emissions within the transport sector. And that is primarily from the combustion of petrol and diesel vehicles. The basis on that is also that fuel quality in South Africa is at Euro 2, 15 years behind the technology in that sense. And through that, part of the transition from Euro 2 to Euro 5, Euro 6 requires significant upgrades of the fuel refineries and infrastructure alongside that. So within this analysis on the macroeconomic study, they looked at a transition from Euro 2 to Euro 6 fuels in South Africa, and that would typically provide only a 14% reduction on greenhouse gas emissions in South Africa. However, if we had to transition from the petrol and diesel vehicles today and move to electric vehicles and charge these vehicles, electric vehicles, from the current Eskom grid that is carbon intensive, it will provide a 34% saving on greenhouse gas emissions. And that's because electric vehicles already eradicate tailpipe emissions. However, if we increase the value chain and charge electric vehicles through renewable energy, then it provides 67% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. So that's where we start to see that implication on that. So that's the impact on that. In terms of South Africa's readiness, charging infrastructure is well ahead of the car park of electric vehicles that we have in the country. We have close to 300 public charging stations in the country, and that is viewable from one of the platforms called PlugShare. It's international crowdsourced platform, plugshare.com, and the app where you can see all public infrastructure in the country. And that is also including PV-based charging systems that we have. And then on batteries, the manufacturers of electric vehicles are not only providing a sustainable product, in terms of driving and emissions. The build of the vehicles is including components that are 80% recyclable on them. The other thing is that the automotive manufacturers themselves are then also transitioning into the phase of, their factories are sustainable, powered by renewable energy as well, and looking into that. And then also the supply chain, this is where it is coming into it, ethical supply chain. And now there is a strong push in Europe across open declaration of a sustainable supply chain of all materials that are going into electric vehicles. So this is where it is. It's not out there in the public as much as it should be. There is some, negative connotation and a lot of debunking that's required in the topic as you raised in terms of that. But certainly, there is a whole value chain and ecosystem that is being unpacked towards sustainable mobility and sustainable infrastructure that electric vehicles present.
Super, thanks, Hitton. It's always good to scratch a little bit beneath some of the claims around sustainability, and those facts and figures do help us get a better understanding. So circling back a little bit to one of the core themes, Chris. So we've got one of the worst Gini coefficients in the world, both as a continent, as a country, and Johannesburg's got the highest inequality in Africa. So how do we embrace these kind of smart initiatives without leaving many of the citizens behind?
Brandon, thanks. I think in rugby terms, that is probably the worst hospital pass that you could have given me, simply because we are unfortunately a country of a mix of first world and third world, and much to Najwa's point. And then at the same time, we sit with this really, really dire economic situation. And really, I think the answer here is we've just got to find that happy balance between not being left behind in respect of technology, but being mindful of the fact that the building blocks, and some of them we've called own goals. It's my honest belief that, and I'm going to be a bit controversial, I think we could have done a lot better with our basic education system over the last 20 years, so that we don't have perpetuate situation that existed before then. We seem to have perpetuated that. And the unfortunate reality here is that if we look at the urbanization, not only, so generally, at the moment, there's about 40%, of Africa's people urbanized, and by about 2030, that number is going to go up to 50%. So it means that in our urban environments, the needs between the people competing for resources, is just going to increase. And at its most basic level, we've got to fix the building blocks, because the reality is that the establishment of a better growing economy, a smart city, and even let's talk about regrowing our economy through infrastructure development. It's not a process, a one-stop process, hit the button and it's all going to happen. This is a journey. And so we have to embark on this journey, bearing in mind this, bringing these two worlds closer and closer together. Because, there are a lot of discussions within our society. For instance, I'll give you an example. The most controversial discussion has been always the e-tolls in the Johannesburg, in and around Johannesburg, the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project. And to date, if you just use the word e-tolls, you could get lynched and mobbed. But the fact of the matter is, some user pays principle has to apply, and society has to acknowledge its responsibility to contribute to that. But at the same time, we're having this discussion around how we reduce our carbon footprint. We go to electric cars. So the discussion on, instead of a user pays, is going to, well, why don't we increase the fuel levy? So guess what? In 10, 15 years' time, the poorer people will all be driving the most inefficient cars. So that then becomes an inadvertent additional tax. So societally, we're going to have to, think completely out of the box, not get left behind. And you do see it. And I think the one other fortunate aspect, and I don't mean any disrespect to people my age or older, but we have a youthful society, a large population of youth across the continent. In fact, the largest globally. In most other countries, bulk of the populations in their 60s to 80s. We have a rather youthful population who will be able to embrace the technology. You already see every young person with the mobile phone, and often even in an informal settlement, there's a satellite dish and most likely have a mobile phone. So we got to look at how do you bring the two worlds a lot closer to each other, so that indeed there is that sustainability and we don't increase the gap to the point where you have entire or bulk of the society expressing its dissatisfaction in rather distasteful ways. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Chris. Yeah, touching on some sensitive issues, but really we need to join the dots between all of these. Otherwise, it doesn't help to leave either bits or people behind. Otherwise, we completely being unsustainable. So Chris mentioned the education system and how that's perhaps failed us. Najwa, if you were speaking to a class of people coming to the end of high school and knowing what you know around the jobs landscape, what would you advise them in terms of what to follow? And you can use your imagination here. It may be that the kinds of things we need are not actually in existence.
Thank you, Brandon. Yeah, that's it's a bit of a tough one in that, as Chris and others have been saying, our education system has really failed us. And I think that the first thing I would say to a young person is look for the opportunity, you know, hustle, really go out there and hustle. Hustle, find opportunity, be creative, don't have a linear approach to your education. Find experiences that will contribute to your skill set and that will build those capabilities. Find opportunities where it's not just about the formal education, but make yourself available, volunteer, have a curiosity about what is going on around you in the world, and definitely then follow up on that. Look for role models, and that often is a difficult thing within the African context, and specifically also within the South African context. In our communities, in township areas, in rural spaces, there's not always sufficient role models for young people to aspire to be and to follow in those people's pathways. So I think that you must have a healthy curiosity. You must expect the unexpected. Don't believe that formal education is going to result in a well-paid job or even in a job for that matter. Rely on your own agency and build your own agency and continue to build a network of people, of resources. The end of the day, as a young person, don't expect that government or the private sector or civil society owes you anything or that they're going to bring anything to the table. Much depends on you as an individual to have that agency and curiosity, and also to make sure that you have the self-belief and explore issues such as being self-employed. Focus on having a practical skill set. Yes, the academics are very important, but where we stand today, where jobs are not guaranteed, where there isn't sufficient demand, if you have the agency to create demand through what you engage in as an individual, then at least you can take care of your basic needs as you navigate and as you find the appropriate pathways for you into the future. Thanks, Brandon.
Oh, thanks, Nadia. I think that should be published somewhere. Wow. Very grounded in reality, a little bit scary, but absolutely spot on, I think. I think if anything, this pandemic has taught a lot of us the meaning of that word hustle. And perhaps there's a lot of opportunity in that. Just freeing our minds from the traditional pipeline of how things work. Lawrence, bit of a hospital past perhaps. So this thing of hustling, how can people hustle in this very high-tech environment that we are moving into?
Thank you, Brandon and colleagues. I think I like the term that Najwa used, hustle, because it resonates with a lot of people across the communities. But I think the reality of the hustle is that and here we're talking ecosystem. The ecosystem must also be there, and I'm talking when I'm saying there across, whether it's government, whether it's policy, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's accessibility, whether it's connectivity, to support the hustle. So, I mean, a case in point, if you think of what happened with the pandemic and the lockdown, was access to basic education information. You know, that if I'm a hustler in some rural town, I mean, to Mrs. point, all these infrastructure and the discussions we're having about sustainability in Africa, it has a different flavor because it's not urban, it's very urban, it's rural. So now if I want to hustle, but the entire system does not support the hustle that I see in front of me, the reality is that no matter how much I hustle, I will not break through because why? Every infrastructure and support infrastructure that is supposed to support this hustle is not in place. So as technologists, as investors, as government, as drivers of change within the communities, sustainability of the ecosystem and created that interconnected, integrated ecosystem is going to be really, really critical going forward in order to support, these hustles. Because when then I want to hustle, I know at least I can open that door and this door will open the next door. But I don't want to open a door and I hit a massive steel wall and brick wall and everything else. So that's the key that we need to look into, which then, as all of us, and in a case also in terms of governments across the continent, with the youngest population, as we all know, I mean, you look into the businesses that M-Pesa created in East Africa, all the way down to Southern and Central Africa now, where it's going. Those were businesses that did not exist. And those are the hustlers, which are mostly young people. But what happened there? The telco industry created the connectivity. And other industries then could then latch on that and create other business. I mean, the agri sector, if you think of how it is, you think of your auntie or grandma or your what we call a small scale farmer. That small scale farmer, through a telco infrastructure and connectivity and ecosystem created, could now, through a cell phone, be able to what? Plant, harvest, sell, get the goods to the industry, to the market a lot quicker and get money. And now that economic activity changed. So the hustle is important that it must be supported by all of us in the ecosystem. Thank you, Brent.
Very well handled, Hospital Pass. So yes, smartness can indeed enable hustling, and that's what we need to see. So in a more narrow definition of smart city infrastructure, in my limited understanding of it, we see a lot of digital data gathering. I've read about initiatives that speak of even smart dustbins, air quality monitors, all sorts of things. So these are the kinds of tools that can enable the managers of cities to manage better. Is there potentially a disconnect between what the technology can do and then the sort of political will and efficiencies of the people receiving that information? So given that the challenges that we face in terms of city management at times in our various cities, are we going to be in a situation where we have the data, we have the technology, we have the tools, but then we don't actually have the backup behind it to act on that? Yamisa, I wonder if you've got some thoughts on
that. Brendan, that's a tough one. I think what we are talking about, maybe just to start with recapping what you were saying on what smart infrastructure is, you use the notion of data-driven monitoring management of infrastructure. That's really what smart infrastructure is about. So, and I always say, the basic of smart infrastructure is putting the first layer, which is basically sensoring. You should be able to sense, the things that you want to manage. You should be able to get the information and connect. So sensoring connectivity, once you do that layer, then we are able to put more intelligence on top of it. And I think the question is that, do we have the will, the political will? I think that is one thing that we are struggling with, which probably goes with clarity. I always use the word clarity. I sometimes feel that we don't have either same clarity or enough clarity of what we want to achieve. And other speakers have actually alluded to that. But I would rather take it back so that I'm politically correct. Let me take it back to the education aspect and training. I think we have got enough people to train in Africa, so we don't have a problem with people to train. And we have got, and people are smart. You know, you can train anybody. I was actually shocked. One of my nieces is quite old now. She didn't like mathematics. Now at her old age, well, when I'm saying old, I'm saying towards the 30s. She is now saying, you know what, I like maths. I'm just illustrating that people are smart. You know, it just depends how we stimulate their senses, their intellect senses. But where I'm getting on with this, I always have this idea of saying, uh, uh, sport people, whether it's rugby, whether it's soccer, whether it's cricket, they start learning their trade in primary, in the school, and they go with it to secondary school, and they start being professionals after school. So, but they start early to learn it. Our education system somehow does not do that with other trades. Whether it's plumbing, you know, sometimes we focus only on coding, but there's a lot of other trades that will be useful for smart infrastructure. Plumbing, welding, technical, technical, we used to call it technical drawing, carpentry. If we can start those things very early in life. So I'm just saying that our training system programs, we need to look at those. I'm currently involved with boot camps. You know, of course, everyone who talks boot camp today, he thinks ICT, and I think that's where I'm involved with. But I'm always thinking about it that, you know, that's an effective way of skilling people, of changing people's careers. Why can't we use the same approach with other trades? So I'm just saying that we need to rethink our training system and our programs. Thank you.
I hear you. Thanks, Tumisa. Sorry for the rough question, but very well handled. So coming a bit to the environmental sustainability side, I know that smart infrastructure can include things like air quality monitoring, energy monitoring. Shamima, I wonder if you could tell us in broad terms, maybe just expand on the kinds of mechanisms that so-called smart infrastructure can bring in terms of low-hanging fruit for environmental protection.
Thanks, Brandon. So, again, I think, I think we're all repeating this thing around ecosystems. But, when we think about environmental protection, it goes beyond, I think, what our traditional view of environmental protection could be, where, tying yourself to a tree to protect it. It can be as simple as using technology through IoT to use your device to make better choices. An example I would give is, in the morning before you decide on what time to leave or when to leave, you'll have a look at your Google Maps, look at the traffic congestion, find that it's a bit too congested. So, let me work from home for the first 2 hours, and then I'll travel to work later. And really, that has the dual benefit of the time saving, the productivity from a GDP perspective, as well as the environment, because not being in congestion would lower your emissions. Similarly, I think I spoke about consumer behavior. So if we use the smart infrastructure from the ICT perspective, where people can be informed on their electricity consumption. I think the example that someone had mentioned is also with Eskom. How Eskom has communicated during load shedding times, you need to, lower your usage of certain items, has actually then driven a lower demand and demand management. And I think that, you know, from a policy perspective, I think, you know, we're talking about policy and environment that needs to be created to foster this type of movement towards living our better lives and being more conscious of these things. But I think that irrespective of the environment that you create, those disruptions will come. You know, if you take an example of, I think I mentioned Uber, someone had mentioned PESA, all of these disruptions will happen, and they will have environmental benefits. There's no doubt about it. I think the main thing, though, is for that information, that access to information, to really be there to drive those better behaviors from a consumer perspective. Thanks.
Thanks, Shamima. So that unfortunately brings us to the end of what's been a very stimulating session for me. So thank you, all of you. It's been fantastic to get a little bit of insight into all of your respective worlds. And yeah, you all pieces of this ecosystem that needs to work for the whole. And it's really been good to hear what you're up to and learn a bit more about smart infrastructure. So thank you for your time. And I hope that everyone watching enjoyed.